Okay, welcome everybody to this Lit in Colour Pioneers programme overview of the text. Just to introduce myself quickly, my name's Julie Hughes. I'm a subject specialist with Pearson Edexcel and have been for about 10 years now, and have been quite closely involved really in the new GCSE text that Pearson launched a couple of years ago. And hopefully I'll be able to give you a really good overview of them today and of the programme. So what are we going to do today? We're going to look briefly at the Lit in Colour Pioneers programme. I'm just going to make sure that you all understand exactly what is on offer and what is going to happen. And then I'm going to give you an overview of the recently added GCSE texts. And hopefully that'll give you a few sort of tips in the classroom that you can actually adapt to other texts that you're doing, actually, just a few little ideas there. So that's what I'm going to do. So 300 book library donation, we call that a mini library. Now that arrives in July and the books are for Key Stage 3, 4 and 5, and there's some brilliant titles there. You can see a few. I haven't actually read A Case of Exploding Mangoes, but I have got that on my list to read. I've read Girl, Woman, Other, and I've read The Girl and the Goddess. But the other ones I haven't. I'm going to have a look. I haven't read A Grain of Wheat. I need to put that on my list. But you've got some super books there. It's a 300 book library donation and a real great selection of diverse and interesting texts for Key Stage 3, 4 and 5. So that's fantastic. And then obviously the GCSE book donation, whichever you've chosen, is your class sets will arrive in July. And we have The Empress by Tanika Gupta, Refugee Boy by Benjamin Zephaniah, and adapted for the stage by Lem Sissay, and Boys Don't Cry for Mallory Blackman. And I'm going to tell you about those three today in some detail. Please do pop in the main chat which one of those texts you're thinking of doing this year. That would be lovely. Also, we have the Lit in Pioneers Club. Now, I stress that this is offered. You don't have to, uptake is not compulsory in any way. But you're all automatically joined in that Lit in Colour Pioneers Club once you're part of the Lit in Colour programme. We do have an online after-school club, which boosts reading for pleasure through the book donation, which has been very successful in the previous years that we've run it. Key Stage 3 students aim towards years 8 and 9, which is great. We also offer CPD training for your librarian to support the running and facilitation of the club, and that went down very well last year, so that's a brilliant idea. And we have also video content and activity resources that you can access as well, which is fantastic. So that's all available to you online behind the scenes. So again, that's I think the after school club. I was lucky enough to go to a school that was in the last Lit in Club in Colour Pioneers activity session, and it was very well received. Very well received. Book clubs are tricky, aren't they, for Key Stage 3? It's not so much the people that want to join a book club will be enthusiastic. It's how you get through to people who wouldn't see a book club as something that they want to do. And I think this online one did actually seem to be working. People had chosen a book from the new library of books that had arrived, and were quite keen to take them up on the offer of the online after school club. So let's have a look then at the actual GCSE texts that are on offer. I'm really excited about them, and you'll find there's an awful lot of resources on our website. If you go to the English Literature section of the Edexcel GCSE website, you'll find there's an awful lot for each of the texts already. And there are a lot of schools running them already. So perhaps if you could put in the main chat, if you are already doing one of these new texts, if you could pop it in, that would be brilliant. And if you're happy to share your email address, that would be great as well, because it's sometimes lovely to do collaborative planning with people. But I gave some thought with all these texts to how you would introduce them. And I've kind of moved away from the idea of introducing via the sort of go away and research the context kind of way of doing it, and trying to sort of bring it alive a little bit more with some big questions. So these are some questions for one of the texts here. So this is Boys Don't Cry by Mallory Blackman, who actually was on Woman's Hour on Radio 4 today, talking about, she has a memoir out called Just Saying, which sounded very interesting and might make a good sort of background purchase as well to Boys Don't Cry. It might be interesting to look at some extracts of that alongside Boys Don't Cry. But I did Boys Don't Cry actually with a high achieving Year 9 group a couple of years ago, and I found it very successful. It was probably one of the most enthusiastically received novels I've done in the classroom, actually. And I introduced it by using questions like this. So I wrote the questions out on A4 pieces of paper. I did it as a silent debate, actually, because they were quite a quiet class. And they wrote their comments on it, and then after 5 minutes passed it, or a couple of minutes, passed it along to the next person. So things like, should boys cry? And they would write their comment. How do we treat outsiders? How should we treat outsiders? An interesting one was, are we responsible for the sins of our fathers? And that was an interesting one, given, debates at the moment about slavery, for instance. And that, not necessarily related to the book Boys Don't Cry, but it certainly got the students talking about that area, really. And that's why all these novels are really great to use in the classroom in terms of raising big questions like this. Which is most important, maths or music? Again, another one. What constitutes a perfect family? So this is moving into some of the other novels. Whose responsibility is knife crime there? That one relates to the refugee boy. How easy is it to be myself? Again, that's very much Boys Don't Cry related. Who should decide how children are raised? Again, that's another question. That these are from various novels, but they're sort of an idea of questions that you can use to prompt debate. Who am I? Where do I come from? And how do I fit in? That was a really interesting one, actually. Students really enjoyed that. And what constitutes a perfect family? That needs some sensitivity in the classroom, obviously, in terms of the profile of the students that you're teaching, obviously. But I use these as an intro, and this is just a sort of selection. Then we talk about the issues that are raised. And what I find then is that gives them a good contextual kind of background to the novel before we actually start, in a more realistic way, because they're bringing their own ideas to it rather than me sort of lecturing them on what the context is. So for Boys Don't Cry, for instance, if we think about it contextually, it is very much a current modern book. So the context of it is really now. So the students are able to bring much more to it than they might perhaps to another text that is set outside of their frame of reference. So that's why I think the big questions are useful here, and it's really useful to make sure that we think about what students bring to it. And here's just a quotation there from Mallory Blackman. She wrote it because she wanted to show Black children just getting on with their lives. Now, if you haven't read Boys Don't Cry, the interesting thing about it really from a ethnic perspective is that she doesn't make a big deal out of the ethnicity of the family. In fact, you only find out in passing. And the first time I skim read it, I didn't really notice, actually. There was just one sort of comment about it. So that's an interesting thing, is that she doesn't make it about being Black. The book is more about being an adolescent and being different. And there's dual narratives. One is Dante, the main protagonist, who unexpectedly finds himself a teenage father. And the other narrative is his brother, Adam, who is adjusting to the fact that he's coming out as gay. And they are both in a single parent family with their father. So it's really interesting, actually. It raises loads of important and interesting debates. So themes like tolerance, anger, masculinity, very current at the moment, family, fatherhood, growing up. And in terms of contextually, the whole idea of teenage pregnancy, it's really interesting because he is left with the baby. So it kind of turns the whole stereotype on its head. Homophobia, the welfare state, very interesting about the place of the state in family life. Single parent families, gender roles. One of the students, and I thought this is one of the most gratifying comments I've had really, said that he enjoyed the book because it kind of treated him as a grown-up. And I really liked that. It treated teenagers, it showed growing up, but it also the themes it dealt with were dealt with sensitively, but it treated him as a grown-up, as a reader, which I thought was a really interesting comment to make. So sticking with the whole idea of sort of context and background to the book, another way that I've handled it is to give out some facts and ask the students if they are surprised. So I gave that out as a chart in the middle of an A3 sheet. And again, I asked for comments. So were any of them surprised by them? They were surprised by the 16.1% of single parent households today headed by fathers, as was I actually. They were also surprised by the 1995 cancelled commercial, actually. And we talked about changing attitudes. That was, again, but each of these prompts discussion rather than being sort of, this is context, learn it. It was about discussion. And so on their A3 sheet, they write their comments around it. So that was another way of approaching it. So that's Boys Don't Cry. That gives you a little bit of sort of background about it, hopefully, has whet your appetite. If that's not the novel that you're going, or play that you're going to do for Key Stage 4, it is a really good text for high achieving Year 9. And it does raise an awful lot of important issues. It's also actually a thoroughly good story. And this, as I say, I don't think I've read a novel in the classroom that's been so universally lapped up, really, as that was. So I can highly recommend it. Now, we do have online a full scheme of work, and it's in Word format as well as PDF, so you can download it, and it's got lots of links to other resources. Things like lots of articles about the background, reviews of the novel and that kind of thing. And it literally takes you through, I think, about 16 to 20 lessons worth of ideas in there. So that's a good starting point. And it's all based around the idea of sort of big questions. You know, each lesson has a big question that hopefully once they've read some more of the novel, they can think about answering in different ways. Just to show you what the exam style looks like, if you haven't been with us before, there's always 2 questions for each text for post-1914 in the exam. And they always have a little quotation, which kind of helps to anchor it. So here we've got, the first question is, in what ways is Emma important in Boys Don't Cry? Emma is the baby that Dante finds himself, I was going to say stuck with, but you have to read it to find out whether I've used the correct phrase there. And a little quote there, Dante, you're the dad, Emma is our daughter, and that's Melanie, who is the mother. And then the second question is explore the significance of anger in the novel. So the question might be a character question, or it might be a theme question. And the quotation is, anger at Josh and Logan and Paul, anger at the whole world, anger at myself. And that's Adam in the dual narrative talking. So that's Dante's brother talking about how difficult he's finding it to handle the reactions of his friends to coming out. And I think that's really sensitively handled in the novel. And certainly the way it was handled in the novel enabled me to talk about it quite openly and yet sensitively in the classroom. It encouraged a sensitive attitude to what can be at the moment quite a sort of difficult subject to approach in the classroom. So it was really useful from that point of view. So again, I can highly recommend it. I really can. So any comments about that, please put them in the attendee chat. It would be lovely to hear from you. We also have PowerPoint lessons. Now, we have these for most of the texts on the GCSE syllabus, actually. We devised them in lockdown, but they've proved to be very successful, post-lockdown. What it is, it's a PowerPoint with a recording that takes a student through revision of the text, themes, characters, and then having done some revision of the plot, characters, themes, etc., then it goes on to take them through how to answer an exam question. and it literally takes them through step by step. Now you can set it for students as homework, and they can stop the PowerPoint at certain points in order to answer the questions. But it is also useful for teachers as well, just to look at how good ways to approach. And there's also a couple of sort of activities in there that you might want to use in the classroom, like, you know, the theme matchups, etc. So they've proved to be really, really useful, and they're all available on the website. I think they might be under the live training section, but if you can't find them and you want to, then if you email Claire Haviland, she'll be able to point you in the right direction. But there's one for each of the texts, and they've been very useful so far. So that's Boys Don't Cry. Any comments about that would be great. Otherwise, I'm going to move on now to Refugee Boy. I must say you're very quiet. It would be lovely to have some contributions, some comments there. Refugee Boy. Obviously Benjamin Zephaniah's, but adapted for the stage by Lem Sissay. Both big characters, both Lem Sissay and Benjamin Zephaniah. And the wonderful thing about this is you can find an awful lot online about Benjamin Zephaniah, and you can also find a lot of video clips of him talking about the book as well, which is great. It is the stage version. It's the play that we've included, which is the Lem Sissay. And he's an interesting character in himself, actually. His book about his finding out, he grew up in care, and he traces through all the documents of his life that he was handed when he was left the care system. He wrote a book using the documents to write his life story of his childhood, and it's really, really interesting, and it gives you a good background actually in terms of his motives for wanting to get involved with something like Refugee Boy and why he wanted to adapt it for the stage. So I can highly recommend that. Kind of themes covered again: belonging, family, friendship, prejudice, conflict, violence. So very similar to Boys Don't Cry. It's probably obviously more violence in it than in Boys Don't Cry. But again, it's that whole idea, that whole idea of where do I belong, where have I come from? Obviously this more from the refugee angle than from the colour prejudice angle. But certainly, you know, a different kind of prejudice. Conflict again, violence, and it's really interesting, particularly in the light of current events, in terms of you know, the refugees still coming over from you know, across from Calais, and also the whole idea of the refugees fleeing places like the Sudan at the moment. So it's very, very relevant and very, very interesting for students. In terms of context, there you've got knife crime. You've got the care system, which is very interesting in itself. Again, obviously needs careful handling, because, you know, you may well have students in your class who are in the care system themselves. So that obviously needs some thought. The whole idea of immigration, you know, again, it's very much a political hot potato. It's very interesting to get students' views on that. Civil war, again, very relevant at the moment with what's happening in the Sudan. And the whole idea of language and who owns language, what language we speak and why, and what languages are valued is very, very interesting. So I think it's a really interesting novel. It raises, as again, a play, it raises loads of interesting classroom debates. And again, it's very current. And I think because it's current, it's interesting to value students' ideas rather than dictating the contextual information. So the way I try to do it was, I've only briefly done this play in the classroom when I was doing a little bit of supply last year, but I actually, rather than telling them what to think about it, I actually gave a table out like this, and I wanted to value their ideas as much as giving them real, if you like, facts. I wanted to value what they thought about it. So they had a little table like this again on an A3 sheet of paper, and I encouraged them to make notes on each one. What did they think about immigration? What were their views? What did they know about Ethiopia? You know, what did they think? They knew very little. What did they know about what a refugee was? What did they feel about it? What did they know about being British? And again, loads of really interesting things came back. You know, we passed them round, adding to them, and then we talked about them. I spent an entire lesson on this, and it was really good in terms of valuing what they brought to the party, because there were a couple of students in the class who had been through the refugee and asylum system. And there was one boy who had actually been briefly in the care system, and he didn't mind us talking about that idea as well. Knife crime, again, what do they think about knives? What do they think about knife crime? And what do they think about violence in society? And it was really good to start the play from a basis of valuing what they already know and what they already knew. So that was an interesting way to approach it. And another one, again, was the whole idea of giving them some facts like this and asking them what interested them. So rather than sort of dictating what they then went away and learnt, each one chose one of them and found out more information about it. And again, this was a complete eye-opener. They knew nothing about Ethiopia and Eritrea, and they didn't really have any idea about how many. They thought millions of refugees. The class I taught, millions of refugees came into the country. So it's quite interesting, really, to unpick what they already knew and really think about it and why people came here. And the number of children. I mean, it's interesting, 78,000 children in the care system in 2019, 20,000 more than in 2009, which was interesting. Again, obviously, with the caveat there that obviously you're going to be sensitive to the profile of students in your class when dealing with something like this. So again, I think refugee boys, really interesting in terms of background and in terms of raising current affairs and in terms of just broadening the students' knowledge about something that is very, very current in society and something that has an effect on all of us, and that only in the last couple of days has been discussed again in the House of Lords, so in terms of refugees. So really interesting from that point of view. So any comments so far, please please put them in the main chat. Anything that's just interested you or that you want to take further would be brilliant. So please do put that in the chat. It would be lovely. So I'm going to move on now to the one that I had least knowledge of, actually, where I learnt loads myself. It was brilliant. I haven't taught it, but I have read it. And that's Tanika Gupta's Empress. And it was about and it literally said, the blurb to it is that it brings a hidden part of British history glorious to life. I know a couple of schools are doing it, and it's been a big success so far, actually. Students have really enjoyed the whole idea. It's a mixture of real people and fictional people, which is another interesting one. It's a really interesting text to look at. So it's British Empire, and again, really current, given the weekend we've had, isn't it? Very interesting to talk to students about what they know of the empire. I would imagine most students would have very little knowledge, actually, and it may well not mean anything to them, actually. So it's about the experience of Asians in Britain, about the Golden Jubilee, which again is very interesting to think about what the Jubilee meant to people in Victoria's era, as opposed to what it meant to us last year and what the coronation meant to us. The first Asian MP, very interesting. Queen Victoria and Abdul, so her relationship with her servant, which was very frowned upon amongst her family and amongst politicians of the time. And ayahs, so the nannies, the Asian nannies, and their treatment in the UK. So again, really interesting areas there that I think you'll find that students don't know much about and will find really interesting to research, and again has modern resonance, very much so, really, in terms of the whole empire, the whole monarchy. So another way in to any play, really, and it does work especially with this, and it's something I've done with books as well, is to give them a character list. So no information about the plot or anything, just give them a character list and get them to categorize the characters. get them to think about what the novel might be about. Again, that's interesting with Boys Don't Cry as well, and Refugee Boy to a degree. But with Boys Don't Cry, it is, categorize them, put them into 3 categories, that kind of thing. What the names mean, or just say to them what strikes you. And probably what strikes them is some of the names are very unfamiliar. One is real. And just use that as a springboard, really, for a way into any text. It works really well. In terms of the Empress, we've got some exciting new resources because it is going to be on at Stratford. So if you are doing the Empress, we're trying to get in touch with them to see whether they're going to film it. But if you follow either of those links when you get the PowerPoint, there's a lot of resources, including an interview with the author, an interview with the director, the Royal Shakespeare Company practitioner interviews, and there's a link to booking tickets as well. So it's fabulous that it's being done by the Royal Shakespeare Company. That might hugely tempt me towards doing that play, because I think it's fabulous if you can actually see it live. And it obviously means, a lot to the students. There's a lot of students I know, in Key Stage 4 who won't ever have seen a live performance of anything, let alone a performance of the play that they're studying. So it's really interesting if you can find something with a current performance. It would be fabulous to go to Stratford and see that. So that's the texts, the GCSE texts, sort of a background to them, the ones that are part of the Lit in Colour Pioneers programme. So if you're choosing one of those, hopefully that's been useful to you. I'm now going to move on to the poetry, which is probably for me the most exciting part. I absolutely love this Belongings Poetry Anthology. I really love it. Please do tell me if you've had a go at it already. I know that Margarita in the background there has definitely had a look at this, because I'm sure a school she was at has done this anthology. It's now my favourite. I did a big project on it, including a scheme of work on it the year before last, actually, and really, really enjoyed it. Both the legacy poems and the modern ones, actually, I found really enjoyable. So there you are, 15 poems as per usual, a real cross-section of time frames and of ethnicities and topics, linked very loosely together under the theme of belonging. And what I like about it is the theme is quite loose for belonging, actually. So you've got quite a lot of areas, you've got quite a lot of themes and ideas that you can cover within the idea of belonging. So there's a lot of poems on the nature themes, childhood, memories. There's a lot of sort of nostalgic poems. There's a lot of about identity, both personal identity and just growing up as well. Family relationships, the Captain Cook to my brother, and Peckham Rye Lane's a fabulous one, about the feeling of a hot, busy city, and how all the different nationalities and ethnicities are sort of jostling together on a hot day. It's brilliant. It's about sort of watching people from a bus journey. We Refugees, Benjamin Zephaniah again, fabulous. In Wales Wanted to be Italian, I'll come to in a moment. That's probably my absolute favourite. My Mother's Kitchen is a lovely one, actually, even though it's kind of about displacement. It resonated with me. I'm probably of that age, actually, where, you're starting to think about what you leave behind and what possessions you have. And it's certainly it's a lovely poem. I'd suggest you all have a read of it anyway, but it certainly resonated for me, because at the time that I was doing the scheme of work and reading it, my mother was moving from her house into a small retirement complex flat. So her children and grandchildren were all over her possessions like sort of vultures. And it did make me think about what I wanted to keep, and what from her kitchen reminded me of my childhood. So I'd certainly have a look at that poem. It's really lovely. Sunday Dip is fab as well. Not one I expected to like, actually, but it's a real kind of, it's got a real sort of joyful feeling there. And it's interesting contextually as well about it. It's about the end of a working week for sort of manual labourers. It's great. So yeah, even if you don't do this anthology, please do download a copy and use them as unseen poems, because certainly In Wales Wanted to Be Italian, Peckham Rye Lane, Sunday Dip, My Mother's Kitchen are so accessible that you could use them as an unseen poem, and students would get a lot out of it. So please do have a look. So ways to approach then in the classroom. One way again I do is the whole categorise. So I would just, before even doing anything, I would give them the titles and I would ask them to put into 3 categories or 2 categories or whatever. Categories of their own choice, and see what they do with the titles. I often sometimes do it without the name of the poet as well, and without the time frame. So I would literally just put the titles down and I would get them to categorise them. I would get them to start, I might then give them themes. I might give them the main categories like memories, childhood, belonging, and see where they put, and then what they put. Because one thing again that gets forgotten when we do unseen poetry, for instance, is that they can analyse the title. And again, when they're doing comparisons in the exam, it's perfectly valid to compare the titles and to think about titles and why poets have chosen that particular title. So just give them the titles, no dates, no names. Either give them 3 categories or get them to make their own categories up, or do both, and then discuss why they've put Captain Cook to my brother in memories, and why they've put us in belonging, and get them to make comments about it, and build up little comparisons just of the titles before they get in there. Another intro way is to mash up the first lines into a poem. And I've tried to do this here. This is the first line of each of the 15 poems here. So I've made a poem out of it. It is the first mild day of March. The morning road is thronged with merry boys. I come from a musical place, mild mist upon the hill. So actually get them to analyse that as a poem, either before they do all the poems or later on, get them to do it. Another thing I do is I get them to actually make a poem from 6 or 7 of the poems. So choose your best line out of these 6 or 7 poems and make another poem out of it. It's something I do quite often. It's really good for getting them to think about what techniques and what tone and mood is in a particular poem. The other thing I do is I put first lines out and I get them to match them up with the titles and see if they can, how many they get right, and why they've put a particular first line with a particular title is also a fabulous introductory technique. I do a lot of this at Key Stage 3 as well, actually, rather than, not that I would do the actual anthology poems at Key Stage 3, but certainly I'd do an anthology like this under if I wasn't doing it for the exam later on. I think sometimes it's easy to get sort of rushed and bogged down with just the exam element of poetry, which I think sometimes can suck the enjoyment out of it. And I'd always want it to be a joyous break from an exam slog rather than part of the exam slog, if that makes sense. Because I'd like poetry to be something that students go, do you know what, I can smash this because I can have any ideas I want about it, provided I can back them up. And I think that's, I don't have to understand every word. I don't have to understand every technique. I can bring myself to this poem and I can get something from it, is certainly the way I'd like to approach it. So let's look at one poem, my favourite. And it's there. And I've taken out some of the words. I do this again quite often. And I get them to put whatever words. They'd probably be able to do, if they'd seen the title, they'd know what to put at the top. But get them to fill it in. Get them to really think about it. It's a lovely poem, In Wales Wanting to Be Italian, because you initially think it's about being Welsh. And in fact, the poet is not British, but not white in ethnicity. But the poem isn't actually focused on that. The poem is actually focused on those feelings that we all have when we're teenagers about not being very not being very interesting. And I certainly, when I was a teenager, wanted to be much more exciting than my family was. I wanted to be really exciting. And I think MTS Darker totally gets it here with that idea of in Wales wanting to be Italian. Here's the poem in total. I love that idea of coming from somewhere boring and wanting to be somewhere more exciting. And I think this poem just absolutely sums it up. So again, it's not, I know that MTS Darker's poem Tissue is on a lot of anthologies for GCSE. And this is really different in terms of tone, because you come to it, you might look at her name and her background, her contextual background, and think that this was going to be very much about ethnic identity, but it's not. It's about universal identity. It's just about being young, and I think it's fabulous. So it's that idea of this belonging anthology, not just being, if you like, about identity in terms of ethnicity. It's about identity in terms of just anybody when they're growing up. And it's about identity in terms of family, and it's about belonging in terms of countries as well as family units, and that. It's great. I hope I've whet your appetite for it anyway. And here's just a basic. This comes from the PowerPoint lesson that I mentioned to you, that is there for every one of our texts and for the poetry as well. And this is from the Belonging Anthology one. And it's just a starter activity, so match up the pictures to the poems. That's quite useful to do before they've even read them, actually, is an interesting one. So that would be another way in. And again, to discuss what they think from, I mean, Captain Cook's fairly obvious, I suppose. They'll go for the ship there, but Island Man, again, they'll go to the island. But Peckham Rye, you know, what would they go for? Sunday Dip, I remember, you know, the emigre. Again, what would they go for and why for each one? So again, it's that idea of prompting ideas and associations from titles again before they get fully into a poem. And there you go. Eventually, obviously, they have to do the exam preparation. And one of the big choices they have to make, and it will be in an exam situation, is what to match up with what poem. So here's sort of a way of doing it, really. Which one would you match up and why? And I often do this as a revision, as a sort of quick fire thing. I'll give them 2 columns like that and get them to, you know, the emigre is memories, the emigre is childhood innocence. And I might also, on the right-hand side, I would have another list of poems. So I would have, you know, list of poems either side, and then the themes in the middle. And then a quick fire, which one would you use and why? Because we don't want them wasting any time in the exam. We want them already to be able to go, oh, Island Man, happy memories, I'm going to go for In Wales Wanting to be Italian. You know, the emigre, childhood innocent, I'm going to go for In Wales Wanting to be Italian. That kind of thing. So that they've got that choice quickly and they can stick with it without any regrets in the exam. And speaking about the exam, in terms of resources, the PowerPoint lessons are there for all of the texts, including the new ones. And one of the things that it has is this model paragraph activity, which I use a lot in the classroom. And each lesson has this. And basically, they are given a slide with the paragraphs on, and they have to match it up to the exam requirements on the outside. So where does that answer focus on the question? Where does it focus on context? Where does it develop the answer? That kind of thing. Where does it compare? So I find those really, really useful. And there's the exam style question for the poetry. And reread My Sister, and that will be printed on the paper, exactly the same as it is for every anthology question. Choose one other poem from the Belonging Anthology and compare how nature affects people. And then they're given the long list. So they read My Sister, they might look down the list and go, oh, I'm going to go for Mild Mist Upon the Hill, great. Or I'm going to go for Island Man. But whatever they do, they need to make their choice quickly so that they can move on and answer successfully. Now, I see I've only taken up 45 of your very valuable minutes. I'm going to look at where the resources are now and give you some other support. But could I have some comments, please? Any ideas, any thoughts in the chat about what you've enjoyed today or what you might need going forward? Margarita says, I've just done Jamaican British as Unseen and it worked a treat in my new school. Brilliant. Well done. And you say, you're sorry, still can't work the chat. Jamaican British proved very engaging. Excellent. So any other thoughts on that would be brilliant. Any poem that I've really whet your appetite for, any text that I've really whet your appetite for would be brilliant. So please do pop that in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just go through the support. Obviously, you've got your Lit in Pioneers main support as part of being the Lit in Pioneers programme. There's the link to the Edexcel website. And everything is there in terms of exemplars, in terms of resource, teaching and learning resources, in terms of exam papers, etc., and the anthology is there as well. So you can get that quite easy. So if you don't do Belonging, do please use it as Unseen because they're fabulous. Clarity says, in Wales sounds great. I think I'll introduce this to Year 8. It is, honestly, it's fabulous. I'm so glad I've whet your appetite for that. I think it's, you know, I want to write to her and tell her how much I've enjoyed it. I have actually met her and was able to say that I loved her poetry, but I hadn't read that poem, or she hadn't written it at the time, and it was a shame because I want to see her again and say how absolutely inspired I was by that poem. I think it's fantastic. So what else do we have? We have a podcast here. Pam McLaughlin from Pearson does a regular podcast on English, and there is one about the Lit in Colour with Penguin and Pearson, and in it she discusses the diversity and discusses the text and talks about how to join the programme, etc. So that's a really useful one if you want to just refresh your memory on the Lit in Pioneer programme. That would be great. And then you've got the useful contacts there. Your first port of call is always Claire Haviland, who is the subject advisor for English. She's the main sort of point of contact. I'm freelance, but if you want to speak to me about anything I've said today, about anything that's been in here in terms of teaching, then if you contact Claire, she will pass it on to me. I'd also just like to mention that I do network events regularly, and the next one for literature is coming up on the 10th of July, and I'm going to do a real focus on poetry. So I may well be doing again some of the things you've said today, but also extra things, because I think we've all kind of maybe neglected poetry over the last sort of couple of years with the pandemic. Some people didn't do it; they chose to do the 19th century instead, and I think it tends to get a little bit forgotten. And in the sort of struggle, if you like, to get through the other texts in time. So I really want to sort of whet your appetite again. So the network event on the 10th of July is going to focus on poetry, and I'm going to hopefully whet your appetite even more. So any more thoughts, please do. Any more fans of Imtiaz Darker, I'll be more than happy to pass your name on when I write to her and tell her how marvellous she is. And so then I'll end on thanks for joining us today.